What is up? Oh my God, we switched again. How did this happen?
We switched again.
Every time.
StreamYard hates us, my friend.
There it is.
No, we got it figured out. It's all good. We're good now.
Woo!
It's great.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the show. I'm David, and right here is my man,
Charlie. How's everybody doing?
I go by Charles. I don't want to call it. I feel like calling you Charlie is like talking
Charles
to a Charles
is too formal.
Charlie is like talking to a 7-year-old.
I don't care.
Did you get a golden ticket, Charlie?
I don't care. Or Chuck.
Chuck. I'll call you Chuck from time to time.
Chuck has been okay. Exactly. Charles is just too formal for me. What's going on, Josh? What's up, Odd?
How you doing, man? Odd. Glad to see you back in here. Tonight's gonna be a great show. We do have a special guest that's gonna be on with us, author and historian Pat Fitzhugh is gonna be here talking about his research of the Bell Witch curse. And last week we talked about the curse of the Bell Witch. We went a little bit more in depth off the Patreon page. So if any of you are patrons, you got to hear some of these other theories and, the article from the psychic talking about her theory and everything. But tonight we're going to get some ideas, some theory from somebody who's got boots on the ground, somebody that's actually been there, done that. So I'm pretty excited about this.
Yes, I'm so pumped. I'm really excited for this one. Here I was 2-3 weeks ago. I didn't really know what the Bell Witch was, but now it's like that's been the assignment. That's what's been going on. So it's great. It's been nice.
Pretty insane. What's up, Justin? Hey, Lori.
Very.
Heather. Good to see you all. Chuck.
Yes.
How's it been?
Hey, man, it was great. I had a great week. Work's been a little slow, but that's okay. Can't complain there. Things have been cold. Kansas City's been freezing.
You don't say.
Yeah, right. It's January. Who would have thought? But hey, I can't complain too much. It's the part of the year. I'm just glad that I'm not dying of allergies anymore because things are frozen off now. So
no more sinus infections.
Well, now I got to worry about dryness. So that's great. You wake up and you're like, just dying, trying to get air. But anyways, now things have been good. How about you?
Been good. Still working on the Paracon. Been announcing more guest speakers and got the concert all set. Randall Shreve, my boy Randall is playing the show. He's going to headline it, and opening up for Randall is going to be Josh Hurd. So that's going to be awesome. A lot of people know Josh from Malvern Manor, but they don't. Some people don't know that he actually plays music too.
Yeah.
So
he's a phenomenal artist. I think he's great. He could sing. He can play awesome. I think it's great.
Yeah, he's got like that. I don't know, that vibe, like the band 10 Years or. But yeah, he kind of puts off that vibe whenever he's playing and singing. So it'll be enjoyable. He's gonna have a booth there, so he'll be there both days. Randall Shreve will just be there for the night. I don't know if he's gonna be there during the day. I offered him a booth so he could sell like merchandise and stuff, but we'll see.
Yeah, if he wants it or not, whatever.
Yeah. For those that are interested, the Haunting History Paracon is October 7th and 8th at the Elks Lodge in Joplin, Missouri. You can get your tickets now. They're available on Eventbrite. You can do a search on Eventbrite for the Haunting History Paracon, or go to the Facebook page for Haunting History. I've been posting like crazy about the event, so you can go there. And in the event page, there is a link to the Eventbrite event where you can get tickets. We do have VIP tickets that gets you access to everything but the ghost hunts. That includes like concert, the film contest, the gallery reading from Jessica Potter, and plus the 2 days entrance to the show, and you get a goodie bag too. Or you can just get single day tickets or both tickets for both days for the conference. We do have individual concert tickets and individual gallery reading tickets, and you can access those by clicking on the Saturday event. So with that being said, whew, that was a mouthful, actually.
That was you. You just kind of went off. I was like, okay, I'll sit back and chill.
Yeah, just the advertiser. That's like,
And
it's out there.
Lori, I know Dave appreciates every bit of that too. I know he
Yes,
definitely appreciates
absolutely.
it. Any sort
Absolutely.
of sharing, loving, any reactions to our posts or his posts with the Paracon stuff, any engagement is amazing. Facebook likes to curb our stuff.
Yeah, if you want to help people on Facebook get their stuff out there, heart react to it. Don't just give it a thumbs up, because the algorithm now is set up to share stuff that gets more hearts, and the likes don't do anything really
Yes,
for
absolutely.
advertising. So encourage everybody else to do the same. And if you want to say screw the algorithms, I'm gonna get it out there to people. You can advertise in the stories. There's no
Yep.
algorithm for the stories.
That's what that's what I've started doing with a lot of other things that I post. I started putting them in stories now, and it feels better because it actually is like, oh, people are seeing my stuff. That's great. Screw you, fake book. Anyways,
Meta book.
yeah, meta book. I'm sorry, my bad. Meta fake book. Let's go with that. How that it's horrible. Good to have you, Cassie. Always.
Yep.
All right.
So,
Should we kick this sucker into overdrive?
there wasn't anything else we needed to put out there.
I can't think of anything. Nothing coming up. I don't have any haunted stuff. I don't think you have any haunted stuff.
Nothing I want to talk about.
At least that you're wanting to talk about. Anyways, that'll come in another time.
Yeah, I am getting busy next weekend, so
Yes, you are.
this is gonna be the start of something beautiful. God, I can't put my drink anywhere.
Well, that's
I need to clean
unfortunate.
up. I need to clean house here. All right, guys. So, without further ado, we want to say welcome and introduce you guys to a gentleman I had met about 5 years ago, I think it was, at the old Fort Paracon in Fort Smith. Um, I knew about this subject, the Bell Witch subject, but I didn't know as much as I thought I knew. And it's because of this man right here. Talking to this guy gave me such insight that we became friends on Facebook, and we've chatted every now and then. And such a great dude, and very insightful, and has a lot of research done and time invested in this. So let me quit bragging about him. Let me bring him on, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Pat Fitzhugh. Let me unmute him. There he is. Hey, Pat.
What's going on, Pat?
Thanks for coming on, bud.
Hey, how's it going? Uh, Greetings from the great state of Tennessee, the land of the volunteers, funky ass weather, and that old thing that they call the Bell Witch. Glad to be here
Yes.
tonight. It's been a long time.
Yes.
Yeah, we've you came in, you jumped on the stream last week towards the end of it, and you weren't. Of course, you're not part of the Patreon page, so you didn't get to hear the other
The other
theories
bits.
we
Yeah.
brought. So I know we'll probably touch on those theories tonight. And for anybody that's watching, if you want to see more of our interview with Pat after this show, you can jump over to our Patreon page and become part of the Boogeyman team, the After Dark team, and you can see more of our interview with Pat. More laid back, hair down kind of interview.
Exactly.
But for right now, Pat, I want to know how and why did you get involved with the whole Bell Witch curse?
Well, when I was a very, very small child, I had a lot of problems with insomnia, as I do right now. And my mother had quite a lot of trouble trying to get me to go to sleep at night. She would try to read me all these little kid stories, and they never would get me sleepy. But she read me this book sometimes. It was called The Bell Witch at Adams. It was written by a school teacher, and it was a children's book about a local. And for some reason, when she would read to me from that before bedtime, I would fall asleep, which I know that's kind of weird, but I'm wired much different from everyone else. Um, I think what really happened is all these things that she was telling me and what this book said just boggled my mind. Even at a young age, I was thinking, how could this have happened? How could that have happened? And I would lay there in bed and just, not be afraid, but be thinking about how this stuff could have happened. And then later on, a couple of years later, my mother brought up the topic of the Bell Witch again. And just for reference, my mother was born and raised just a few miles from ground zero of the Bell Witch legend.
Oh
Um,
wow.
she brought it up and then started mentioning all these people she knew that were descendants of people involved in the legend. And at that point, I'm like, wow. So you mean these people were real? At least the people were, and all these places that I later read about in another book were real? And she was like, yes. So that's what really, piqued my interest. And when I got a little bit older, I started having her take me to places like the library, the archives, places like that where I could read up as much as I can on the legend, trying to make heads or tails out of it, see whether we're talking hocus pocus or what it was. So that's really where I got my start. And um, I was already interested in the paranormal anyway, a lot of cases, not just the Bell Witch. But I got my start there on the Bell Witch, and it's just gone forward since then.
Now you said something that I think is the most intriguing aspect of this whole Bell Witch thing is that I think this is the most intangible thing too is it's based off of real people that you can find documented to be
Mhm.
to have lived in that time in that area, and it's something intangible, like you can see the
Yeah,
physical proof of it. So
yeah, real people, real places. Um, the biggest challenge to me as a researcher with regards to the real people isn't so much verifying their existence because I did that a long time ago,
hmm
but trying to understand whether they ever spoke of or wrote about having an encounter with the so called Bell Witch
Mm.
and put it in some form where I can actually find and validate it some way.
right.
Like
That's the biggest.
finding evidence of people's individual stories with having uh, interactions with the Bell Witch. That's pretty
Yes,
awesome.
account, firsthand accounts. Uh, of course, they would have to be written. They
Like,
certainly
yeah.
did recordings back then, and unfortunately, there is no firsthand account in existence, regardless of
Mm.
what people tell you. There was one account that was purported to be an eyewitness firsthand account by one of the Bell's sons, but where we run into a problem there is that it hasn't been found. It was an old manuscript that the son wrote after he grew up, which that was in about 1846. He allegedly wrote it and spoke of a lot of things that you hear associated with the legend now.
Mm.
The covers being pulled, children's faces getting slapped, skeptics visiting the house and getting tormented, his father's serious medical illness and ultimate demise, supposedly at the hands of the entity. Sounds really good, but
Yeah.
that
Now,
old manuscript has not come to light. I know a lot of
Mm.
people, well, several people, in addition to myself, who have seriously searched for that manuscript for the purpose of having the handwriting analyzed to see whether or not it could have been Richard Bell's handwriting or it was the handwriting of somebody else, such as the person who wrote the book that said it was the only eyewitness account. So, as a researcher, I have to look at stuff like that. But bottom line, I've had probably 40 people tell me that they actually have the manuscript, but yet when I ask for them to come forward with it or make a photograph of it and show me, I never hear from them again. So, as far
yeah.
as I'm concerned, unless I have that manuscript in front of me, can take it down here to Vanderbilt or wherever and have a handwriting analysis, comparative analysis with legal documents signed by Richard Bell. As far as I'm concerned, there's no eyewitness account.
Wow.
Um,
I believe wasn't
most,
there a book
uh,
that was supposedly written by one of the sons? I thought maybe maybe somebody just took that the manuscript and threw that in a book and then used his name
Well,
for credit. But I thought there was a book.
yes, the manuscript by Richard Williams Bell,
Yeah.
written in 1846, that was by a son, but we don't know if that exists.
Mm.
That's the thing. There's no proof of it existing, and it seems like the harder you try to look for it, the more upset people become.
For all we know,
Another
his sorry, my bad.
right, it's another red flag there, and that's part of
Yeah.
being a researcher. You've got to constantly look for red flags. Now, there was a book written, or at least published, in 1934 by Dr. Charles Bailey Bell, a neurosurgeon in Nashville. He was the grandson, or wait a minute, let's say great grandson, I believe, of John Bell of Bell Witch infamy. His father was Dr. Joel Thomas Bell, a local doctor there in Adams, Tennessee. And his father was John Bell Jr., who you hear a lot about in the legend and the different Bell Witch stories. And then, of course, John Bell Sr. was his father. So there is that Bell descendant who wrote a book.
Okay. Now, and I do like as far as like the shadiness of some of the information that comes forward. Like I've come across that too in my own research, and like with the spook lights, we had a guy who said he filmed a craft that was where this light was coming from, and said he had video proof and all this, and we called him out on it, and we tried to get an interview and wanted to see it. Never heard from him again. So I think a lot of people out there want to say stuff like, "Yeah, I've got this information," but they just want the clout. They don't want the
Yep.
they don't want to provide any proof or anything. They just want to be said, "Hey, look at me." It's like demonologists in the paranormal field. A lot of
Yeah,
people that just
a
research
lot of
the
people, and convince a lot of people that you've got some much sought after information. Yeah, you're a big dude, but then, badass, whatever. But then you got somebody like me comes along and say, "Hey, lay it on the table. I want to investigate it." Then it's like the tail gets tucked and they run the opposite
Oh
direction.
no, I can't. I can't do that. It's back at blah 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 blah. It's like okay,
Yeah,
sure,
and I
whatever.
know I've read some of a lot of your Facebook posts, Dave. We were talking about paranormal evidence and stuff, and I know you know exactly what I'm talking about. I think you and a lot of other researchers run into the same thing.
mm-hmm.
Everybody
we
knows
got
it's easy to know everything.
Oh yeah.
we got a question in chat, but this will actually kind of touch on as we go because we want to kind of get to that point. It's what do you consider the most believable story of the Bell Witch? And I know you've been forming a theory, so we'll talk about that here in a little bit.
I was gonna say I kind of want to talk about the stages as the story
Yes,
progresses.
we want to
Yeah.
progress this. We have a full hour, folks, so
Yeah.
let's
Calm
take it a
yourselves,
little
guys.
bit at a time.
Let's pace it. Come on, Odd. Let's pace it.
Now, so because how long have you been doing the research on the Bell Witch, the whole case?
I started at a very young age going to libraries, um, archive places, stuff like that. 1978. It was so that's this year it'll be 44 years, and also in that year I went to a place not far from my house. It was an old abandoned house up in the woods on a hill with a friend of mine, and we brought a little Radio Shack tape recorder up there, put it on record, left, and then came back later and picked up the recorder, played it back, and didn't really hear anything exciting. Of course, little did we know, and I don't know if the term EVP had even been coined that many years ago, but I don't know. Who knows? Maybe we did the world's very first EVP and just didn't realize it. Actually, I think EVP was done in a scientific setting long before then, but
Well, I know Nikola Tesla.
I was gonna say I'm pretty. Yeah. It's yeah.
With his lightning thing, where
Yep.
he's getting these voices coming through. Uh, some people thought it was radio frequencies, but he wasn't using radio frequencies. I don't know. Wasn't there? Can't tell you. But so, at what point in your research? I mean, I'm sure at the beginning the stories obviously had you intrigued enough to do the research, but like, Did you find a level of excitement that in the possibility that maybe this would have been true?
Yeah. Yeah, of course, it would be very, exciting if I could easily find out if it were true. I think it would raise a lot more questions than answers.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, it, you
I
know,
can tell by the look on your face you're tiptoeing around some things.
you know, I, as a youngster, of course, I wanted it to be true.
Yeah.
But as I started researching, I went to school, I went to college, I started studying logic, reasoning, fallacies, and things like that. Then I had to ask my question as a researcher, is it my job to prove it true or prove it false? And my answer was no. As a researcher, at least based on the mission that I set out, is just to get to the bottom what caused the Bell Witch legend.
And I
Whether
think
it,
that's, I'm
go ahead.
sorry to cut you off. I was just going to say, I think that's something that's very understated,
Yes.
especially today in the paranormal field. Is a lot of investigators will do a little bit of research and then go to the location and be like, "Oh, it's haunted." Like, what happened to your research? You just throw it out the window, or
Mm,
and for you to be doing this for so long and still keeping that mindset, kudos to you.
Balance
Yes.
is key to credible research. Um, Researchers who approach things with balance,
Hmm.
meaning they're, I guess you would say, on the fence as such. They're not trying to prove it's paranormal or prove that it's not paranormal, but they're open to all sides and they will listen to and research and analyze all different sides without showing partiality
Yeah.
either way. That's why after I began researching a while, I refined my mission down to not proving that it's true or proving that it's false as written, but simply answering the question, what got this thing started?
Yeah.
So that's the way I look at it. I
Now
can
I
give
know.
you 10 parameters, uh, solid theories, and I can give you 10 solid skeptical theories. But, to what degree of proof could I go to
Yeah.
Right.
or actually even prove any of those?
Yeah.
So, which leads to the
Proof is
question,
always.
something that happened so long ago, do we need to look at absolute proof or do we need to look at a preponderance of the information and evidence and see what makes the most sense?
Yeah.
So, I mean, the theories, a lot of ideas out there both ways. I don't think you can absolutely prove any of them, but I think some carry more merit than others.
Absolutely. Now I know your research has garnered some attention, even from TV shows and everything, and you've been in the public eye. Uh, and I know Charles binged watched one of the shows on the Bell
Yes.
Witch, and I know you had some questions, Charles, that you wanted to.
Yeah. So to kind of kick things off with those kind of questions, in your best, so I noticed that some people would say that, oh, Bell saw a weird animal out while he's hunting and he came back and that's when things started to happen. Or the weird sound started happening around the house and that's when things started to happen. When, according to you, what really, like, not necessarily what kicked it off, but what was the main staple of when all the weird stuff started to happen around their place?
The first known and documented incident, at least that I've been able to find, was when John Bell was outside inspecting his fields and ran across this strange looking animal, half dog, half rabbit,
Yes.
and pointed his gun, took a shot, and the thing allegedly, just disappeared.
Okay.
Now, looking at this and from a spiritual or paranormal perspective, if this animal was some type, perhaps shapeshifter, trickster, something like
Yeah.
that, it appeared to him, then that event is not what kicked it off. Some
Mm,
other event had to have happened to kick it off and have this entity appear to him.
yes.
So I would think something happened before that.
Now, I know
Uh,
you mentioned in the TV show the story about, I think, Drury Bell, is that his name? The
Drury, one of the
Yeah,
sons.
where they went out, they dug up a head, removed the jaw, brought it back to the house. Dad found out what it was, told him to take it back, and then they threw the one of them threw the jaw onto the ground, and then I guess it knocked teeth loose. And you'd even said that yourself that um, one of the accounts that the witch bell, what she said was like something about losing teeth, or it was a spirit there. A spirit was there because of
They
some
lost
looking
something.
for teeth. Yeah, they lost something, or it was something like that. So, is that? Do you think that could be actually something there too?
Yeah, looking from a paranormal perspective, there has always been speculation that there was very much a Native American connection.
Yeah,
We know that the Native Americans back in I think it was the Mississippian period in culture, specifically the mound builders who came there before the Cherokees and the Creeks.
mm,
The mound builders did bury their dead in the area. A lot of Native American artifacts have been found, as well as Native American uh, graves. The Corbin Hall story, or excuse me, Drury Bell and Corbin Hall story, where they disturbed the sacred grave. I mean, that's like a classic textbook starting of a haunting.
yeah.
Right.
Like that's why. That's
Right. So, but, what we have to go back, or what I have to go back and look at, there's no information or proof anywhere that those boys ever disturbed a Native American grave.
true.
The only reason that that's part of the Bell Witch legend is because it was written in a book that somebody put out about 1894, a lot of which is found to be fictional.
Mm,
And many of those stories have, in recent years, been traced back to other hauntings and cases that were before the Bell Witch and which had been written about and were available in book form, between the 1830s and 1894. So we
yeah.
don't really have proof that Drury Bell disturbed the grave. But when you look at that and just the theories about the different Native American spirits, sacred graveyards, and as this author also put in the book, that when the Bell Witch spirit was asked what it was and what it wanted, it once replied that it was the spirit of someone buried nearby in the woods who had lost their tooth and they were looking for their tooth.
It's almost like a story of like the headless ghost looking for his head.
Yeah,
That's what it
like
reminds me of that
Right.
classic
And,
headless ghost.
and the author of that book was from that very area. So I think
Mhm.
anybody from that area would know right off. They would say, okay, yes, this was very well known Native American area. Drury Bell discovered the grave. The thing even said, discovered the grave and the tooth got lost. And the thing even said that it lost its tooth. Wow, how convenient. There it
right.
is.
Yeah, yeah.
But
And
that
See,
same
and
book
why
goes
would it
on.
be mad at Drury Bell and not John Bell, right? Why would it not go after John Bell instead, or why would it go after Drury and his friend instead of John? Because they're the ones that disturb the grave, right?
Right. And I don't think I necessarily have found anything that really stood out with Drury being harassed or bothered
Yeah.
any
I
more than
yeah. Uh oh.
oh, it
so.
froze.
Oh, there it
There you
goes.
Looks
There it
like our
goes.
connection. There it goes again.
There it
All
goes. We're
right.
back.
Sorry about that.
go. No, you're good.
There's an Arby's roast stack in front of my Wi-Fi connector or
Oh, that's
antenna that
it.
I didn't. Now I'm sorry. Um, But another thing on that book where it mentioned about the grave and the lost tooth, the family goes on to ask the entity many different times, what is it? What does it want? And
Right.
each time it gave a seemingly believable story. But
Mm.
then they would investigate to try to validate that seemingly reasonable story. And then the entity would laugh at them and say they were a bunch of old fools and suckers.
Hmm.
They kind of
See,
had a sense of humor, I guess, in a way.
Yeah.
and it's amazing when I think back of all the accounts of every time they've asked it questions or just how intelligent the responses were. We don't see that in today's world really on like how you know what I'm saying? Like it
When we get to,
almost seems too good to be true that it got so many good, amazing, credible answers, like straightforward, but we don't really hear that in today's world with paranormal activity.
yeah.
Right. And, you know, those answers, very intelligent
Yes.
and all knowing. And there is a theory about that, which has yet to be proven, but it's one that might be provable someday.
Mm.
And that goes along the lines of the school teacher in the area. Back
Yeah.
before, when Betsy Bell was a little bitty girl, before she even became a teenager or anything, this school teacher would tell the Bell family, what a wonderful, beautiful little girl Betsy was, and what a sweet, wonderful wife she would make a man one day. It was kind of creepy. I mean, the
Sorry,
school teacher, he was young himself, but he was still like he was 11 years older than Betsy. It was just kind of creepy him talking about this little girl constantly. Um, but then as she kind of started growing into teenage years and womanhood, is when these disturbances were reported to have happened.
mm.
Mm.
And this school teacher, I did a lot of research on him, and so did some other people. The whole time he taught school in the Red River area to the Bell kids and others as a happy young bachelor, he actually had a wife stashed away in Nashville, I think it is,
Wow.
uh,
Wow.
originally from Dixon County, but in Nashville, and never said anything to anybody about her. And then
Huh.
about the time Bell Witch went away, according to the legend, this school teacher's wife up in Nashville died. And,
Huh.
some families, descendants of families who lived at the Red River settlement at the time and who were friends of the Bells, have told me about stories handed down through their families where those kids back then thought this Professor Powell was crazy. I mean, he would do all these sayings and incantations and everything. They didn't know what he was involved in. He
Huh.
would tell them that it was Latin, but it so happens one of the Bell's neighbor's children, named Calvin Johnson, was like almost a genius, and he already knew Latin, and it wasn't Latin. And
Black magic.
who knows? I
Well, I
mean,
mean,
there's
in the 1830s, you wouldn't expect like voodoo and some of that darker stuff to
Oh, it's
really be
witchcraft,
around
black
this
magic,
time.
whatever.
But
there's
yeah,
Well, I mean,
yeah,
there's always the thing of black magic, and that theory's been brought up, and
Right.
actually
With
several.
other people, of course, I'm sure.
Yeah, and then Professor Powell. Um, some people who have studied him say that by today's standards, he would be an absolute genius.
Mm.
Yeah, he had studied advanced mathematics and a lot of other things. He was reportedly a very friendly, sociable guy. People loved and trusted him. He was the type of guy that you could tell, you could meet him and then 30 minutes later confide in him your deepest and darkest secrets.
huh.
I mean, it's like people told him all about their lives. And what's even scarier is
Hmm.
after he got out of the education profession, he became a politician.
Uh oh.
That's a lot.
Silver tongue.
So
That's
he
a
was a
lot.
predator, is what you're selling us.
He was a politician. He was the sheriff. He was a justice of the peace. He was a bunch. He was a
Wow.
soldier. A lot of things. The guy was involved in until he suddenly had a stroke and debilitated him for a number of years until he died. So yeah, there's the some people are saying the intelligent answers were coming from this guy that he knew ventriloquism. He was at the Bell House a lot. He had some friends that were very close to him that were kind of smart like he was and into some of the same things. Um, so some people are saying he is the only person who lived there at the time with the level of intelligence to pull something like that off without being caught.
Now, do you believe that? So, not necessarily do you believe, but okay, would it be possible that he was doing this also? Like, obviously, the girl Betsy was being abused in some way, whether it was spiritual or by somebody in the house. It's questionable. Do you think she may have confided in somebody and was like, "Hey, this is happening," and then school teacher was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna help with that," and that's it went from there?
Um, I don't believe that the daughter or anybody else there had undergone any abuse other
Good,
than by the entity.
good.
But I'll quickly point out, even though I'm old, I'm not that old.
No,
I wasn't there.
Yeah.
I would have had to have been there and actually seen it happen, or had a good feeling that it was happening for me to say that I believe any type of abuse happened,
okay.
other than the Bell Witch's abuse.
Yes.
On that note, now from what we've read on the internet and everything like that, um, it's basically stated that John Bell's wife never really experienced any of it. Now, is that something you found true throughout your research, or is that is that something that's kind of false information?
Um, the legend says that the entity was nice to Mrs. Bell.
Hmm.
Um, I have my take on that. Um, Now this is from the I'm got on my paranormal hat now.
Okay.
Um, the entity would follow the path of least resistance to hurt a person. Now we look at people, um, John Bell and Betsy Bell, the father and daughter, bore the brunt of all the physical torment. They were
Yeah.
tormented worse than anyone else in the family. Mrs. Bell was loved by Kate. Apparently, I mean, according to the legend, the thing brought her grapes and hazelnuts, sang
Hmm.
hymns to her, would talk sweet, say sweet things to her, and was, talk very highly of her.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about least resistance. John Bell was 70 years old, or going right on 70 years old at the time. He had seen better days. He had been in a lot better physical condition. Plus, he was sick with this mysterious affliction that bothered his nervous system. Now, look at Betsy Bell. At the time this started, she was 11 years old. Little girl, not quite even, not even a teenager or anything like that. So, my observation is that Betsy Bell, the youngest daughter, and John Bell, the father, who was way on up in years, were probably the two physically weakest members of that family.
Hmm.
Physically.
Right.
So, what's the path of least resistance to hurt them the worst? Beat the daylights out of them.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what the entity did. Mrs. Bell, on the other hand, that lady, she gave birth to so many children. I mean, the Bells, that was a huge family.
Yeah.
She had birthed a whole lot of children. This was before the days of epidurals and before C-sections. We're talking about birthing a lot of children,
100%,
or a whole
100%
family of
natural.
children.
Yeah.
No C-section, no epidural, just plain old, natural childbirth or whatever it is. You pretend like you have to poop, but there's a watermelon and you push real hard and all of a sudden it comes popping out. At
At
least
least
that's
that's
how I heard.
yeah.
That's how I heard an obstetrician describe it uh, when one of my daughters was being born. He said,
Nope.
pretend you have to poop with
As
a
you're eating
watermelon.
but
So with Mrs. Bell, she had given obviously painful birth, natural birth to all these children. I feel that Mrs. Bell, Lucy Bell, was pound for pound the strongest person in that family.
Mm.
Could endure the most pain. I mean, look what all she had been through. And she was
right.
still only
Make them
middle
like they
age.
used to.
Right. She wasn't way up in years. She was still just middle aged and had been through all that pain of so many natural childbirths.
Yeah.
So, do you think the entity is going to try to beat her up? Probably not, because it's not going to hurt her much because she's used to pain.
Mm.
But
So,
yeah, with the least resistance, also, I mean, one could take that as being spiritual too. But in that case, John Bell was a deacon of his church, so
Good point.
spiritually, he would have been probably probably the
Well,
toughest one out of the family. So I mean, you beat him physically. I mean, you can't since you if you can't evoke the fear spiritually, then do it physically.
okay. So I found out some more information about that. So, is it true that he was actually excommunicated from his church?
yeah, we'll get to that here in one second.
Okay,
I just
cool.
Oh,
wanted to
nice.
finish my thread about the path of least resistance here.
Yes.
John and Betsy were physically the weakest, so the entity attacked them physically. Mrs. Lucy Bell was the strongest, so
Hmm.
the only thing left to attack was Mrs. Bell's mind,
Mm.
because her body was probably stronger than her mind, even though her mind might have been strong. So, how did it attack her mind? By making her sit there and watch and listen to day in and day out her beloved family members getting the crap beat out of them by this
Mm-hmm.
invisible entity and them being cursed. Sure, that did quite a number on Mrs. Bell's mind, and I think that tore her up. Probably broke her heart, tore her up inside, just really
Yeah.
bad.
Mm.
Right. Just the mental anguish of seeing your loved ones getting just beat relentlessly, and there's not a dang thing you can do about it. So I
Oh,
think
of
that's
course.
how it bothered Mrs. Bell. So I don't really think it loved Mrs. Bell like the book said. I think it hated her too. It just had a different way of going after her.
Yeah.
Uh,
I think maybe
John,
the loving comments, the sweet talk, and all that was more of a tease than it was being nice and sweet.
well, that's part of the mental game.
Yeah.
Um, give her a false sense of love, a false sense of security, false sense of friendship. And I mean, they got her.
Hmm.
Yeah.
They've got her
It's true.
trust. They've got it, had her heart, probably. Um, yeah, a very nasty approach.
At this
I
point, I
love
want
you so much that I'm going to sit here and make you watch me beat your husband and daughter up.
Mm.
No logic at all there. It's horrible,
No,
evil.
I agree.
so at this point, um, I know you've been working on a new theory about what actually has happened, and I want to make sure we have enough time to give you to explain your theory and what brought you to this conclusion. So if you want to talk about this, the floor is yours, my man.
Okay. As a researcher, my thoughts and opinions and ultimately theories come from wherever my research takes me.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes me through a lot of places, a lot of subjects, a lot of bright areas, a lot of dark areas, just everywhere. The theory I'm looking at right now that I'm putting together, essentially what happened is there has been a large body of information out there documented about the legend for a long time. And I'm not talking about the stories, but I'm talking about the stories about the stories, stories about the
Right.
family, historical information of the family, historical events outside of the haunting. A lot of things out there, a lot of information where I would think, well, if only this or only that, or if only such and such was connected to this or that. Well, over
Mm.
the last few years, I've found a lot of little, what I would call connector items, little snippets of information that connect a lot of this stuff together, the information. And with that, I am able, to come up with a theory about the Bell Witch legend, exactly where it came from, why it came about,
Mm-hmm.
um, and even an alternative theory that would explain a lot of the things that the primary theory may not explain.
Okay.
You know, and I'm not ready to present that theory. I mean, there's certainly
Mm.
another book or two or three of
Okay.
new information for that theory, but at some point I'll be unveiling that theory. I'm not sure a book is the best place to do it yet, but it will be unveiled.
Okay.
I was surprised in all this that I could find an alternative theory. And when I say alternative, let's just say for a second, if someone were to come up and say that they can prove that the Bell Witch legend is false, then somebody else says, well, how can you explain this person seeing this green woman hanging from a tree or hearing these voices come from across the field? Then that person can come back and say, well, I have scientific evidence that shows exactly how they could have seen this woman in the field and heard those voices and felt like they were beaten up. I'm not saying
Right.
that's my theory or anything. I'm just giving an example of what I mean by alternative theory.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we explored a few alternative theories on the Patreon page. One of them being, well, we kind of talked about this one. Um, if the daughter was being abused, either sexually or physically, um, one aspect of the paranormal that ties to that would be poltergeist activity. And it's usually centered around girls that are in their early teenage years. They're in that transition period of becoming a woman, um, but they can create what's like a poltergeist or a thought form. And two different types of entities. Thought forms have more intelligence, but poltergeist activity is just activity happening around the house. If she was going through so much duress or distress, part of the activity could have been caused by her with psychokinesis, her creating this poltergeist activity that would be presumed to be the ghost, but not actually tied to the ghost. Um, and then there was a psychic. I'm trying to remember this correct, who said something along the same lines of her being abused, but like the mother, or no, it was one of the slaves, because they did own slaves. He couldn't physically do anything to stop it, and he's the one that poisoned John Bell. Um, and the data that some scientists had come up with was that it was arsenic that was in the poison, and that an arsenic was used to kill rats in barns and stuff like that. So they had it there, and I mean, delivering it little by little. If you don't know what you're doing, you're going to give them little drops or whatever to see
Yeah.
the effects. And I think maybe they just stepped it up a notch and put too much into his drink or whatever, and he ended up dying. But those are some of the alternative theories that were kind of presented on some of these other articles that we read
Yeah.
and everything. So I don't know
Just
how much of that ties into what your theory is, but those are some pretty curious ones, and I'm kind of curious to get your take on those.
Yeah, I don't go down the abuse theory path at all because it's based on a premise that's unproven
yeah.
and unlikely. The same about the poison. I know they had there was an article, every year some newspaper somewhere will say the Bell Witch has been solved when really it's like a 20 or 30-year-old theory or whatever that hadn't been solved. I think they had something this year. Supposedly, it was determined that arsenic was most likely the poison used to kill John Bell.
Yeah, the reason behind that was because when they threw it in the fire and it burned blue, arsenic was the only chemical they could figure that would burn that
Right,
way and still produce the killing potency.
right. And there's a couple of problems, I mean, from my standpoint, there's a couple of problems with that. First, there's no proof whatsoever that John Bell was ever poisoned. There's just that little thing in the 1894 book that says it, which is
Yeah,
the
he had a
same,
dark. What,
says
he had
that
like
there's
a dark liquid by his bed. Maybe he was drinking Jägermeister.
that's
Maybe.
yeah, well, he might as well have been. I mean, that book is also the one talking about the blue flame, but arsenic's not a new theory. I mean, I did the same thing many, many years ago. I looked at the
Hmm.
description that was in that old 1890s book and looked up the different symptoms of arsenic poison, what arsenic looks like when it burns, and all that. I mean, I hit that theory many years ago. It's not a brand new theory, so I'm not even sure why it was ever even in the newspaper. But all I came back with was, how do I know John Bell was poisoned? Because some fictional book says it. There is no death certificate out there.
Right.
Um, but we can just assume he died. At least there is there's not actually a grave. The tombstone there is a new one because the old one was stolen years ago.
Yeah.
So,
Oh,
all I keep coming back to is we haven't proven that John Bell was poisoned, but we do know through scientific data that he lived almost twice the life expectancy of a white male born in Isle of Wight, Virginia in the year 1750. He
Wow.
died at
yeah.
70, and his average life expectancy based on where he was born and when he was born was 36 years. So to me, it's more likely he could have died of old age or a number of natural causes.
Hmm.
Yeah, the part of that article was also talking
Now,
about like neurological
he have
or
been
neuro.
poisoned,
Go ahead.
certainly, but we don't know that. We
But
Hmm.
don't
part
even
of
know
that
if he's
article was
poisoned.
talking. Sorry, part of that article was talking about neurological disorders because it was some of the things that people had talked about was the twitching of his face and certain things. People thought he might have had it, or some certain doctor thought he might have had some kind of neurological disorder and could have also been the culprit behind his demise.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
The description in that book does describe a neurological disorder. Years ago, I spent quite a bit of time discussing that with a John Bell descendant who was a medical doctor and a teacher at a medical school. And, the way he talked, he thought it sounded like a neurological thing too. Now,
So we
some
can
people, go ahead.
confirm that those descriptions in the book do relate to a neurological disorder. Not saying that's what happened, but just explains what's in those books.
If what in the if the book was accurate in the description,
Right.
it could point to a neurological order.
Yeah.
And where I have to approach this from is the fact that not everybody who has neurological disorders is full of arsenic either.
Right.
Right.
So,
Exactly. Um, what time is it? I want to make sure we
854.
8:54. Okay. We are going to continue this conversation and this in-depth look at the Bell Witch on our Patreon page, guys. If you haven't followed our Patreon page, now's the time to do it. Um, I will post a little banner here. You can go to our Patreon page, become part of the After Dark crew. You'll get access to the additional content that we do, the After Dark show, and this interview is going to continue over there. Um, we've got a little bit of time. If anybody has any questions, we'll try to get those in real quick.
Yeah.
So
Anybody want to ask a question?
throw them into the chat. Oh, I'm trying not to burp from this root beer as I'm talking. But yeah, you guys can throw them into the chat. We'll try to get some of them answered before then, and then the After Dark show will start at 9:15. So
Yes. I mean, I do have a question.
yeah, go ahead. While we're waiting for other questions.
Is it true that John Bell actually killed someone?
The North Carolina version of the legend says that he killed a man named John Black. Whether or not that's in the records, we don't know. I know I was not able to find that in the record. So, as far as I'm concerned, it's not true, but it doesn't mean it couldn't have happened. But it is most definitely part of the Bell Witch legend.
Now, I know that some people tend to use that as the reason he was excommunicated from the church. Have you heard that too?
No, that would be
At
false.
All? Okay, what led to the excommunication? Because I know we mentioned it earlier, so I just want to touch upon that.
Okay, Mr. Bell had sold a slave to a man named Benjamin Batts, not who is a brother-in-law of the woman named Kate Batts that a lot of people like to say was the reason for all this. Mr. Batts could not go get the slave from Mr. Bell's farm immediately. So Mr. Bell agreed to keep the slave for Mr. Batts until he could come get it, get the man. Well, when he got there to get the man, Mr. Bell charged extra money for keeping the slave there. So Mr. Batts felt that was wrong, and he brought charges against Mr. Bell in the church, because that's where people filed charges back then. It's all about the church. And, the charge of usury, charging too much interest on the sale. He alleged that the extra money he had to pay constituted interest, and it was outrageous and all that. The church heard the case and found Mr. Bell not guilty. Mm-hmm. Then, unsatisfied with that verdict, Mr. Batts went to the Robertson County, the circuit court, and filed charges. Mr. Bell was found guilty. So back at the church lodged 3 charges against Mr. Bell. One had to do with the fact that he was found guilty in a court of law did not mean he was fit to be part of their congregation. There was also a covetousness charge lodged against him and a contempt charge. The church took a vote and he was excommunicated from the church.
Wild.
Now, the ironic part, a couple of little side pieces to this. He petitioned the church over and over for his membership to be reconsidered, and they kept putting it off all the way up until he died. So he never got back into the church. Ironically, the man who had caused all the trouble, Benjamin Batts, himself ended up getting excommunicated from the church not long after that for stealing bacon.
It's fantastic. That's fantastic. That went a completely different direction than I was expecting.
I mean, it is bacon.
It is bacon. It is bacon.
The one question in here was from Odd. Asks, what do you consider as the most believable story of the Bell Witch?
Without like, obviously there's your theory that you're going on, but as of right now, with the info that we have, what do you think is the most, I would say, credible or believable story? Yeah.
Okay. Let me think how to answer this, because probably a lot of people won't be very happy with this answer.
There it goes.
Starting to bring the fire.
Any story. Okay, well, I'll say this. At this point, the most believable story, in my opinion, contained in the Bell Witch legend And I'm not talking about, when I say Bell Witch legend, I'm not just talking about that little book that was written back in the 1890s. I'm talking
Right.
about the entire legend,
Whole
which is
thing.
Yeah.
a whole hell of a lot of that. I think the most believable part is where Betsy Bell was surrounded or appeared to be surrounded by voices or disembodied voices speaking to her at different times. And those voices were even allegedly heard by visitors.
Interesting.
I think that's, and I say but most believable, that doesn't mean I necessarily believe it, but I think that would be the easiest to believe. And that
Okay.
story actually originated long before the 1894 book. A man by the name of Captain Bell, not John Bell, but a different Captain Bell. I think it was John R. Bell. It was the Lewis Clark expedition. After returning from the expedition as their official journalist, he ended up going through the Red River area on the way back to Washington, D.C., I believe it was. And he first reported about that, about people talking about the girl and actually hearing disembodied voices around her. Now, that's still not an eyewitness account because somebody else told him that. That's still hearsay. But my main point with this is this his account was written, this was written down in the year 1819, which was even before the author of the 1894 book was even born. This is the
Yeah.
earliest account that I'm aware of.
Wow.
I didn't find
That's
it. Somebody
awesome.
else found it, but I read it, and it's a big part of a theory I'm working on.
Okay.
But yeah, disembodied voices, Betsy Bell, I think that's probably the most believable, and that's what this very earliest account mentioned.
Interesting.
Sounds pretty kind of paranormal.
All right, guys. That's going to do
Kind
it
of.
for us here on this portion of the show.
Yes.
Again, if you want to follow us onto the Patreon page, you can get more of this interview. For our Patreons, we'll see you in just a few minutes. And for everybody else, thank you for joining us. And hope you have a great week. And next week, we'll be back at the same time and same place.
Bye, everybody. Have a wonderful night.